All right, calling to order the Kingston Springs Regional Planning Commission meeting for today, July 14th. Must be reading the wrong agenda. Okay. A roll call of voting members. Keith Allgood is absent. Tony Campbell?
Here.
Tony Gross is absent. Mike Hargis?
Here.
Lauren Hill?
Here.
Brian McCain is absent. Mike Padno, that's me, I'm here. Chuck Slater?
Here.
Todd Verhoeven?
Here.
All right, and non-voting staff, Sharon Armstrong?
Here.
John Lawless?
Here.
Martha Brooke Perry?
Here.
So we have a quorum. So, Commission, you have the minutes from last month in front of you.
I move that we approve. Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the meeting minutes from last month are approved. Do we have a motion to approve? Just a minute, before I say that, are there any amendments to the agenda, John or Sharon?
Yes, sir. I have one announcement under other item A. The applicant could not be with us tonight and has made arrangements to come next month.
Okay,
that's
so
the
that item will not, we won't have that item today?
The concept review
Right.
will be next month.
Okay. So do we have a motion to approve this agenda as amended?
So move. Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so this agenda is approved, and now we're at the community input line. Welcome, everybody. Is there anybody here who wants to address the commission in the community input section? No? Okay. Thank you. We'll move on to old business. So item 7A, recommendation of the Kingston Springs Regional Planning Commission to the Board of Commissioners for Kingston Springs, a revision of ordinance 21011, public advertising.
I'll start this one off, Mr. Chairman. The ordinance 21001 relates to public notice in our zoning ordinance and was updated last year. As we worked through a couple of processes that are kind of real world related, and looking back at the changes, we found some of these changes kind of result in an extended delay with the applicant, and others are really not practical for the business at hand. So there are really two sections here on this ordinance, which is 21-011, that's also in your packet, and we want to focus on one section of that, which is section 8.070C. There are 3 different items associated with that section. The first item requires notice of a public hearing prior to the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. All of these 3 in this particular section deal with the Board of Zoning Appeals specifically. There are 3 items that are in this section. The first, item 1, requires a public notice of a public hearing prior to the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to be published in a newspaper of local distribution 15 days prior to that meeting. We found that with the cycle of our local newspaper, which would be the Cheatham Exchange these days, we have a Thursday deadline for the following Tuesday publication. So for us to have a Thursday deadline, a Tuesday publication, 15 days advance notice prior to a meeting, we're looking at 30 days before we can have a scheduled meeting after any type of action has been requested, which is for our Board of Zoning Appeals, the appeal process, we would like for it to go as smoothly and as quickly as possibly. 30 days out is a considerable amount of time for the applicant. So staff is requesting that be changed from 15 days down to 7 days, which we think is enough advance public notice, but also gives the applicant a speedier time to appear before the board. But even at 7 days with our newspaper publication, we're probably looking at 20 days out as far as the applicant goes. So we're looking at reducing from 15 down to 7 in item number 1. Item number 2 requires signage to be placed in front of all property cases that appear before the Board of Zoning Appeals. I believe that with this ordinance as it was initially written, there was the Board of Zoning Appeals kind of got caught up in some of this language dealing with zoning changes that really this ordinance kind of umbrellas over. In this particular case, the Board of Zoning Appeals usually deals with items that are really specific to a specific parcel rather than affecting large areas. So if you're changing something from commercial to residential, residential to commercial, it's going to affect the area. As far as the Board of Zoning Appeals goes, they're not looking at items like that. They're looking at items that are appealed specifically to that parcel. So we don't feel that, staff doesn't feel that a signage is particularly necessary in this case as far as alerting the neighbors in the neighborhood and the town, other than the public notice, that a sign is necessary to be placed in someone's yard when they're going before the Board of Zoning Appeals. So we're asking item number 2 to be stricken. Item number 3 requires that the notice of public hearing be sent via certified mail to the neighbors adjacent to the parcel and across the street from the parcel that is appearing before the Board of Zoning Appeals. Again, if this was a zoning change, then yes, appropriate with the Board of Zoning Appeals. Staff doesn't feel it's necessarily appropriate since the appeals process primarily deals with a specific parcel. So sending certified letters to the neighbors surrounding that parcel doesn't seem to be necessary in this particular case. So staff is recommending that item 3 be stricken from this ordinance as well.
Okay.
Those are the 3 changes.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
The publication you're talking about, does anybody in this room get it?
The Chief Exchange?
Chief Exchange.
I do.
That's 2.
Yeah, that's the only paper that we have to work with.
Well, it's a real problem.
Agreed.
I think it's a significant problem, and something needs to be done about it.
You used to be able to get it at the post office, but for some reason they haven't been doing that.
Yeah, I don't know why. Yeah,
Lawrence's? Okay.
Scott,
I get a subscription at the house. It's fairly inexpensive.
It's like $15, $20 a year or something, and they'll mail it to you.
I just think it's terrible that there's no means of communications in the community.
And other than the Cheatham Exchange, we post all of this information on the town's website and our social media, and we'll also try to put it on the community bulletin boards at Lawrence Foods, at the post office. But without a local paper of circulation, I agree that it's a bit of a burden.
Well, when I ask around people about the coming election, I find the vast majority of the people don't even know who the hell's running or what they're running for or anything.
I saw Dale Graham the other day.
It's terrible.
She was like, she didn't realize there was an election coming until she saw the signs out.
Yeah. Well, and they're advertising congressional candidates, but they don't tell what district they're running for.
So,
And what used to be 5th congressional district is now 3 different districts. It's just a terrible
well,
situation.
I got notification from the state about the district and all of that. That was mailed out by
Yeah.
them. But to the point of what we're dealing with here, what would be an alternative? Because we have to give public notice. Is there any other alternative that would be more efficient that's available at this time?
I know.
The only public notice that we have at this moment is the one to be advertising the Cheatham Exchange, because that's the, to coin a word, the localist paper of circulation for Kingston Springs.
What about the Bellevue Extended?
It has to be a newspaper of general circulation within our
Within the area.
Oh,
boundaries.
okay, okay.
Right.
And you said you do put it on the town's Facebook page?
Yes, we put it on our social media as well as our town's website.
Okay, I have a question about the notification of certified mail. When I was on the Board of Zoning Appeals, we had one instance where someone wanted to sell a house to an individual that had a mobile restaurant. And they wanted to be able to park the vehicle there and work out, from there. And something like that, if I lived next door to someone who was looking at bringing in something like that in my home, beside my home, I'd want to know about that. So I don't know whether it needs to be certified or not, but somehow if there's something that can impact someone's home, would we not want to notify them?
And there is a couple of avenues. One is the advertising of the meeting itself, and the advertising of the meeting itself will specifically say what is on the agenda, the address, the item to be discussed, and the appeal that's being made. That'll be on the agenda, that'll be published in that newspaper of local circulation, on our social media, and on our website. So that information's fairly readily available to anybody that's concerned, other than just direct mail coming to your house saying that there's a meeting happening and this is what's happening. There's also the clause that we've left in here. There's a public hearing prior to the Board of Zoning Appeals meetings to allow anyone from the community to address concerns prior to the meeting.
That doesn't answer the questions, though. It seems to me the only thing that's all yours is for the city to write a letter to all of the adjacent property owners and tell them that's what's happening.
I mean, that's what's in there now. If this body chooses to have it remain, then it'll remain.
To me, that's the best thing that I've heard, notify people.
Given the lack of resources available for people to be notified, you know, if we are fortunate enough to get a local paper again, you know, maybe we could address it, but for most people, I think they kind of just go around happily and you know, living their lives, and they're not looking at the activity that's going on within the city, and there may be some things that would affect them. That, you know.
Sharon, did you have something you wanted to
I
add?
did. I have a couple of observations because I'm usually the person that goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and also the case that Ms. Hill mentioned specifically. That was a challenge to the decision of the administrator of the zoning ordinance that was heard. So there are three things that the Board of Zoning Appeals can hear. One is a variance. Is, let's say that your property is you bought a lot of record, it's very narrow and it has steep topography. They're allowed to look at the circumstance tied to the land, not the property owner, tied to the land, and weigh the least amount of variance they can give in order for that lot to be built upon. Because when you buy a lot of record, that means it precedes all of the rules that was already on there. So they're allowed to hear that for variance because of topography, shallowness, steepness, something tied to the circumstance of the land. That's variance. Special exception. Special exception is very limited in almost every zoning district here. Among them are, you can have a church, but only if they meet certain criteria. You can have a school, because you need them for your kids to go to school. But in residential neighborhoods, those are special exceptions because of the traffic that they generate. Those are usually also broadly advertised because they have plans that come before the Planning Commission as well that have to be reviewed. As a matter of fact, we're going to be hearing one tonight for a small project on 2 schools. The third thing that they can hear is a challenge to the decision of any official within the city. So in the case that you mentioned, the decision had already been rendered to them that that type of home occupation was commercial in nature, occurred outside of the structure, the house, and was not permitted. That was the decision staff gave the applicant. And that applicant filed an appeal to challenge that decision, which was heard by the Board of Zoning Appeals. So the duties and structure of the Board of Zoning Appeal are very, very narrow. They're nowhere near as broad as the Planning Commission. And it's structured with a test that's included in the training. And remember the questions that you have to ask in order to get to that decision. So they're rendering opinions on very narrow things that have, in some cases, could potentially affect the neighborhood, but usually don't. And that's usually on a challenge to a staff decision that said that's inappropriate for this neighborhood. That's why we have zoning districts and restrictions, because those are the things that are appropriate for where they're located. So in my opinion, what this does, there are 2 sides to this discussion, and John is right, it does create an additional burden on the applicant, but there's also due process. When someone's filing for an appeal, the longer that strings out before they can be heard, that could cause harm in some situations to them financially or in other ways because they need to be heard on this. It doesn't usually affect the property owner. occurs within that lot. You're not rezoning property, you're not determining uses that aren't allowed, you're not broadening or expanding those uses on a Board of Zoning Appeals.
But you would have
So
already.
the benefit then of not giving the people adjacent notification is what?
Well, I don't know that you're not giving them, you're giving them notice in the form of public hearing, just like we have here, public notice, right?
No, they don't know about it. They have no way of knowing about the
Right,
public hearing.
I understand that point because of the newspaper advertisement. But if I sent a letter, or the city sends a letter to every adjacent property owner, and then plants a sign in somebody's yard, how many hours have we on this planning commission listened to people say, what's up with that sign over by South Hartford Bridge, or what's
I'm
on
only
that sign?
asking about the letter.
So,
I'm only asking about the letter.
right.
The
letter
sign, I
itself-
understand that, the advance notice, I certainly agree, because that's, it becomes an undue hindrance to the individual looking for it.
Right.
I think 30 days is far too long. I'm only asking about the letter and the notification piece
To the adjacent property.
to the adjacent property.
If there is a circumstance that, and I'm not aware of one, where the Board of Zoning Appeals has the authority to permit a circumstance that can hamper the property next door. I mean, it may exist. I've just never, in all the years I've been doing this, have seen one, because they're so limited in what they can consider and what they can do. But if the letter makes this board, if that's your wish, that we recommend that forward, this is done, then we'll be happy to do that. But as an example, if we're looking at a lot that because of topography, that may hamper the person who bought the lot, it has zero impact on the person next door, because they're not allowed to displace their water, they're not allowed to have a nuisance, none of that. That's already regulated elsewhere in the codes. So that is simply saying you have permission to vary that setback on the front by 5 feet because you can't meet it because the lot that you bought was a lot of record. So we're required to let them build on it. The other is a special exception. If someone wants to put a church or a school within a residential district, I don't see how you can not. I mean, when we have public hearings, people show up. When they have town halls, people show up. They show up about the things that they're interested in. But we're willing to do whatever this planning commission.
So this would only be post-decision on a zoning request change, right, or exception, no?
No.
It would?
They do not hear zoning changes are not heard by.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, okay, they hear the appeals
Right,
based on the decisions of this body.
that's
No.
correct.
In those circumstances.
No.
Because of a decision of a building official.
A building official or administrative official, that's who it has to be
That's
staff.
where the
They're not
beginning
appealing
decision
your
is made,
decisions at
and then
all.
if they want to appeal it, they go to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
That's correct.
And then your special exceptions, and I know she's referenced
Okay.
churches and schools. If you remember, every single one of your zones has a list. And it's not just churches and schools. It's
Right.
different things in different, there
Okay.
may be, barber shops or hair cutting, or it just depends on. You have to pull it out and look at what's, a special exception for each particular one.
Okay.
And so if somebody came and said, this use, I think fits within this list for my zone, your Board of Zoning Appeals is going to look at it and say, okay, yes, clearly, a barber shop is allowed in this zone as a special exception. This is clearly a barber shop, and so special exception granted. I have been in special exception requests where there has been some dispute about whether or not the proposed use actually fit within the category listed as special exceptions within that. But Ms. Armstrong is correct with your special exception. It's got to fit in one of those categories. If it doesn't, that's out. Variances, it's got to meet those very strict requirements, or you don't get it, or then you have the appeal of the building official.
So both you and John are recommending these changes. You're in agreement on that?
We are.
Thank you.
This document, it only pertains to the zoning appeals board,
That's correct.
not the board of commissioners or planning commission.
No,
It's
it does
only
not.
for
Well,
the zoning.
we don't
Yeah,
have-
I think we don't have, yeah.
Right, you don't have the
I just want to make sure it doesn't
authority to
affect
regulate
anything
that,
else.
but it doesn't apply to the planning commission, Only the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Okay.
So what are we agreeing to? We're gonna still send the letter, is that right?
I think, from my point of view, I think, let's continue discussion, I'll make a motion, if we have any more discussion.
Well, yeah, I just want to be clear on where we got to with this. So, I mean, I understand the point about the letter. I mean, if the zoning appeals board was going to make a decision that wasn't posted on a sign at a property near my home, and, you know, and I wasn't aware of it, I'd be probably upset about that. So, you know, a letter seems like a small step to take. This is not post a commission deal where you have to have signage for change in zoning, correct?
No.
Correct.
It's not.
No.
Okay, so, you know, if it was, then you'd already have the sign up so
That's
people
correct.
would know there's a zoning change. So
Right,
this one could
right.
happen in the dark a little bit here
Yes.
without the letter. I see the point. Are we taking the signage requirement away as well? If it's gonna go to zoning appeals, does that sign say that?
It does. What the legislation
If I don't read
now
letters, I
says,
might read the sign if I drove by it every day.
It would say application for a variance, application for interpretation of the zoning,
Okay.
or it would say application for a special
And
exception.
again, it's only for a parcel, it's not for the zone.
That's correct.
So everybody driving by, really the only people impacted, it's your house, it's you and me
Yeah.
that
it's
are gonna
just-
be impacted, that's it.
So if
And
you
this
get a
is
letter,
the-
you don't need a sign.
And after the, and this is, and the key here is this is after the initial decision has been made by the administrator or by the city engineer or by whomever is gonna make that, that it would go to the zoning appeal.
If it's an appeal of a decision that's been made.
Right.
If it's a special exception request, the Board of Zoning Appeals is the body that makes the decision on that. It's not, there's not a town official that can say, yes, you've got the special.
No,
You
yeah.
have to bring that initially before the Board of Zoning
Yeah.
Appeals. So they get
Yeah.
first look and first bite at the apple, if you will, on that.
Yeah, okay.
I'll second.
And letters.
I'm not,
Okay, however,
I started on one side of this coin and I think I'm ending up on the other. Okay.
Yeah.
So, as I understand it, the request is that we change the notice from 15 days to 7 days, remove the notification on signs, and remove the requirement for mailing letters to the adjacent property owners. Is that correct? In simple terms?
That's what's been
Yes.
proposed, correct.
You good with that, John?
They both
Yes.
I mean, that's what Lauren said, you understood what she said?
Yes.
Okay, and you did too,
are.
Sean.
I'm not good on legal statements.
So,
Okay. I move we accept the recommendations for the changes to ordinance 21-011 as recommended.
Second.
okay, do we have any more questions or
Well,
discussion?
I do. So, we changed our mind about sending the letter?
Yeah.
How come? Because of the narrowness of that? I mean, you,
Because of the narrowness and the fact that it goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals after a decision is rendered, or if it's a special request, then it has to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals anyway.
right, it does, but that doesn't necessarily mean the neighbors know a special request is gonna be submitted to the Board of Appeals. They don't know that necessarily, if it's an exception. It's something that could be allowable. I know, it's just the fact that they wouldn't know to.
To attend.
Right, so I'm in full agreement with cutting the timeline down. You know,
Okay.
15 days to 7 days is perfect. I'm okay with removing the signage.
But you want to keep the letter.
I think it makes some
Okay.
sense to send the
Can I amend
letters.
my motion?
It's a mail piece, it's certified mail, and that's nothing extra, it just shows that it's certified that we delivered it to their address.
We're talking-
So if they come back later and say, hey, I didn't know this was going on, you did this behind my back, and I'm gonna sue you, at least you can say, well, we sent you a certified letter and we can prove it.
Right.
So to me,
Okay.
that's a small step to take, just to protect the integrity of the process.
So I want
Just not one man's
I want to
opinion.
amend my motion.
So you'll need to have the second needs to be withdrawn.
I withdraw it.
Okay, now you can amend your motion.
I want to amend my motion to recommend changes in ordinance 21-011 for section 1, reducing newspaper notification from 15 days to 7 days. Section 2, removing the notification on signs completely. And on Section 3, I recommend that we continue to notify people whose property is adjacent or across the street from the property by certified mail notification of the changes requested.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion that's seconded. Do we have any other questions? Good. Okay. So, you heard the motion out there? All right, we're good? Everybody heard the motion? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the motion passes with one change to 7 days, part 1 of 8.070, part 2 stricken, and part 3 remaining as written. Okay. All right. Thank you, Lauren. Okay, that was 7A. So now we're at 8A, in new business, amended site plan, Kingston Elementary School, 166 West Kingston Springs Road, map 96, parcel 28.29.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The school system made application and has provided documents which have been staff reviewed to provide concession stands at the middle school and the elementary school. The plans have been reviewed, are in compliance. The only question going through the process, and I had a discussion today, John and I did, with Second South Cheatham, the requirement for sprinklers. When you allow students into the building, and there's fire and a stove, you have to sprinkle the building because they're minors and it's on the school property, but it's not a school function. It's a sports activity, the concession stand. So they have complied, and tonight they also have brought forward some renderings they would like for you to look at. And with that, we're good to go on staff, and it's all they're reviewing document.
Okay.
Whichever one you need, this is for the elementary school first.
Okay.
Is that right, approach?
Yes, please.
You
just tell us who you are.
I'm sure you have seen them.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, staff, my name is Randy Harper with Goodwin Haywood. I'm the civil engineer for the project for the Cheatham County Board of Education. We've done several projects with the Board of Education. What we've got for you, what we've got in front of you tonight is concession stands and restroom facilities for the soccer fields over at Kingston Springs Elementary School, as well as a smaller and a slightly larger concession stand restroom facility for the football field over at Harvard Middle. We're taking the elementary school first, correct?
Which plate are we looking at for the elementary school?
This entire plan.
This is all elementary school.
That's all.
This is elementary school. All this is.
The building elevations are on the back, and there should be color there. It's a modular brick building, metal roof. Just at the elementary school, be 3 stalls, fitness rooms, restrooms.
So that if you're in the elementary school parking lot, and you're facing the soccer field, which is across over that strip,
Yes.
they usually put porta potties on the left-hand side as you're facing the field in the parking lot. And then there's pavilions over on your right.
Yes.
So you're talking about that concession stand would be outside the fence as you're facing the soccer field.
On the right-hand side, yes, sir. So
Behind
As you're
pavilion.
approaching the soccer field from the parking lot, it would be on your
right-hand
left.
side.
It would be on your right?
Yes, sir.
There's
And-
flood zone over there
Yeah, that was.
on the left.
So if you look at it, there's the little pavilion there. We're putting it up next to the fence on the right-hand side. The
Oh.
reason for that is because of the.
Okay,
the
now I
flood-
see where it is.
So, yeah, so there's a floodplain that comes basically halfway across the field right now.
You're looking at
And so in
the-
order to keep the building elevated out of the floodplain, we had to move it over to that side.
It's really tucked in the corner there.
Yes, sir. But one of the things that we did do is there's already a paved access to the left-hand side. So on the outside of the fence, we've got a sidewalk from that paved access all the way across to the restroom facilities. And then there's also a sidewalk that goes from the concession stand restroom facility to the pavilion that actually takes you out to the parking lot. So basically you can walk from the parking lot up the paved drive all the way around and then back out to the parking lot.
Some of us, it's been so long since we've been to the elementary school. We have a hard time remembering what it is.
Planning commission is reviewing the site plan.
And it's not commercial.
Oh, this is the drive at the school. Okay.
Yes.
So that's the drive to the school, and then here's the parking lot.
Yeah,
Okay.
building in front of it.
Yeah.
And as Ms. Armstrong mentioned, we are sprinkling the building. It's about, what was it, a little over 1,000 square feet.
It is, and that decision is dictated by national code, state code. We really don't, or whether we had sprinkler words or not would have been irrelevant in this particular case because there are students in the building.
And that thing that says pavilion, that's over near it. It has a cement pad with a little roof and some picnic tables under it.
Exactly.
Right, yes, sir, right there beside, right at
Yeah.
the parking lot, right beside the playground.
Okay. Very good. Yeah. Yeah. And then the playground's to the left, so we have concession stand, pavilion, playground.
Yeah, the
Okay.
playground actually is right up against the parking lot, and it pretty much
Right.
spans in between.
Okay.
And the school system, they actually just redid that playground, they just finished it up a couple months ago. So.
Okay. Good job. Questions for the engineer? Okay. So this is a separate item.
Do we need a motion to approve this?
Yes.
I make a motion that we approve
Considerations for the site plan.
for the site, to
site
change the
plan.
site plan. Okay.
That's
I make
correct.
a motion to change the site plan.
I
For the
second.
Kingston Springs Elementary School.
Okay.
Accept the
To
changes.
accept the
Accept the
changes
changes to the site
to the
plan.
site plan.
So
Okay.
You got
That's
that.
what I meant.
That's what you, that's exactly what you said, that's right.
Accept
That's right.
the
And
revised
That may not be what I
site plan.
said, that's what I meant.
And we have a second. Are there any questions? Okay. All in favor of the amended site plan for Kingston Springs Elementary School, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's approved.
Thank you.
So now we do the middle school, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Much of the same on that.
Very similar facility.
You can't do something to elementary school you don't give them.
Isn't that right?
Been around here long enough to know that.
What's the one for the high school?
Well,
Well, I think they got one.
that is the high school and middle school soccer field at the elementary school.
That
So
is true, yeah.
that's big stuff.
Hey, we middle school, we do down there, this East Kingston Springs downhill. There's the middle school, this opposite of them.
That's gonna be a nice sound right there, where it is now.
There's the carpet.
So- It's gonna be in the same location as the current concession stand?
It's in the same location as the ticketing booth. So
As the
it's
what?
old ticketing booth.
Oh, okay.
So that the existing concession stand is further down. This is in between the softball field and the football fields. So
Where the
when you
entrance
walk
is
in-
right there,
Correct.
between the softball and football. Okay.
So is that,
Oh, that's good.
is that triangle the shot put pit?
That's correct.
Okay, so
And-
you're not disturbing that?
No, we're putting the new concession stand is going where the shot put pit is now, right there next to the entrance coming off the school parking lot. And then we're reconfiguring the shot put pit a little bit closer to the street. We're actually making it a little bit bigger.
So you're putting in a shot put pit to
Yes, sir.
replace that?
You have to be really strong to throw it that far. though.
Yeah.
That look good.
I'd be impressed with the middle school if it could.
That's right.
The plans have been staff reviewed,
Okay.
meet requirements. They did very fast turnaround.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to accept the amended site plan for Harpeth Middle School for the concession stand. Any more questions or comments?
Tony and Chuck.
Tony and Chuck, yes.
Thank you.
Tony made the motion. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your support.
And now, we are striking item 9A under other, and so we are now at item 9B, comprehensive plan discussion.
briefly again, the planning commission had asked me, specifically the mayor had asked me to provide examples of comprehensive plans that span kind of a broad spectrum. Have any of you had a chance to look at the plan? Okay. At some point, right now you have in place a master plan and you have a neighborhood plan, but you don't really have a comprehensive plan. So give some thought as to when you would like to start this process, which will dovetail somewhat with the growth plan and contain some elements of that, but it really is a guide for the next 20 years rather than being reactive to what's coming. It'll allow you to be proactive to what's coming. So this body makes recommendations to the city commission. You've made that recommendation that they pursue this path, and so you will likely be the body. Last, John, do we have any updates yet from the county executive on the growth plan?
No, ma'am.
Okay. We, as you know, pursued that process at the request of the county, did all the updates, sent everything in. Redistricting came along for the county. It's on the burner, so John is going to ask the mayor if we'd like to reestablish a timeline for this so that we can get it off of our plate. We've submitted that probably 5-6 months ago to the county. What you recommended the city adopted, so it's just been kind of lying there. I just wanted to give you an update on the growth plan because that process was alongside the comprehensive plan.
So, thank you, Sharon. So, next item would be 9C, the TDHA grant update. And who has that? John, is that you?
Apparently, yes.
We're on 9C, the THDA.
Tennessee Housing Development Authority.
Sharon is the planner and Mike as our codes official. And I met with members of the THDA to look at different grant possibilities for both the town and for other perhaps nonprofit entities that could support the community and members or citizens of the town. That was a successful meeting. There are several grant opportunities available. We have then approached the leadership of the ARC and have had subsequent meetings with them and the possibility of the ARC being involved with these THDA grants to again help members of the community that need help. So it's an ongoing process. There are a couple of types of grants, some that the ARC would take a lead on, some that the town would be able to take a lead on, but continuing conversations, but really going to be good for the community once we can get these things off the ground.
And the evidence of this from the perspective of staff is that while code enforcement is something that is clearly needed, in some circumstances people just don't have the financial resources or the expertise, or do they have issues, they're elderly or they're frail or they have other things. So what we discussed with John and with the mayor as well is that we would like to be able to provide some resources to them. There are some small footprint grants that THCA has that are limited to $7,500, but on some structures that goes a long way. You know, when you have a leaking roof or something that needs repair. In other cases, there's a larger grant process that's foot capped at $750,000 a year, where the owner could literally replace an aging unit with a new one that meets code. In some areas of the city, some of your housing stock is somewhat advanced in age. They were not intended to be occupied that long. So this is a process by which we can, while we're having to push the code enforcement issue, also provide people with some outreach and resources to improve their circumstances.
Well, it's a particularly difficult issue to deal with. We've got people here that are living in substandard housing that I don't know how they can ever get out of the hole that they're in.
Well, there's no one solution, you're right, Commissioner Campbell, that we can do immediately and quickly, but if you don't start somewhere, you never go anywhere. So we just wanted to give you an update that those discussions were taking place. And we will be doing an assessment of housing by neighborhood at some point to determine which structures are the most in need. But we didn't want to displace people by condemning their house.
So,
Have them be homeless.
would this be, John, I was on a Rebuilding Nashville project where it's a nonprofit and they get funds, and we went in and helped a woman who was elderly and her house did not meet code. And we went in and did a bunch of changes in the house, had volunteers do that. Is that the kind of thing where a volunteer group comes in, or is it just a contractor that comes in?
It's, there are, as Sharon said, there are a couple of different types of grants. Some small by comparison, several $1,000s that if you've got some specific situation on your property that you need to have remedied. She mentioned a leaky roof or some other structural damage. There are some smaller grants or just straight out funding that would assist with that. There's also the other end of that spectrum, which are the much larger pieces. The best example, I guess, that's the most familiar would be Habitat for Humanity.
Okay.
So it would be not that structure, but it would be a similar type of situation where a nonprofit would be able to construct or obtain houses for sale to those that qualify, and there's this kind of the same kind of application process involved in all of that, and then it just builds upon itself.
And then for the city, if we have a structure through code enforcement that is condemnable, uninhabitable, there could be a city grant that would replace that unit to the homeowner only. It does not serve landlords or people who rent. It's restricted to home ownership. That would take that person out of that circumstance and then replace that. And you have to do a very careful assessment when you're doing these things because it's based on the condition of the structure, not the person. So it qualifies, if it's uninhabitable because of safety hazards, it qualifies that way, not because of the circumstance. But we wanted to be able to provide resources as well as
The city would
encouraging
administer
people
this?
to come forward. Pardon?
The city would administer this?
I'm sorry.
The city would administer?
Yes, the city would administer that, and Kelly Reed, actually, who is our finance director, had, that was part of her responsibilities with Ashland City, because they had one of these home grants, and she administered that.
It would be a mix. The
A
city
mix.
would administer some, but the city would also support, say, a nonprofit that would be the lead on the grant, and then the town would then offer whatever support the town could offer.
That's what they
My red
call-
flag was the contractor comes in and does the work, and who's going to manage what the contractor is doing and hold them accountable to make sure that it is being done according to what
That's
the grant
done
was.
through a normal inspection process that the
yes,
city does
yes.
anyway with their
A
contractors.
lot of
coming
contractors
in.
want to make some money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, no offense to anyone.
Right. That's absolutely something that gets done anyway. And in addition to that, part of the grant that serves nonprofits, Lauren and Mike, is that they have a capacity building grant that allows a nonprofit to put somebody on board whose specific role and training is to do
Yeah.
this grant and to
Habitat
administer it.
But each
So-
grant would be an individual case request, right? I mean, application for
They
each.
really, it depends on the grant, Mr.
Okay,
Hurd.
smaller ones aren't, the bigger
The
ones are.
small ones are individual that are between the homeowner and THDA. We help to
Okay.
identify the people who need the help, and then that goes directly to them, and it's capped at $7,500.
Who assists them in accomplishing that?
Pardon?
Who assists them in accomplishing, like if I needed a $7,500 grant?
Right. It goes directly to THDA. THDA then reaches out to the city and says, can you verify that this issue exists on this property? That's our sole role in it, and then that's between THDA and the homeowner.
Okay.
The nonprofit, they would run with training and assistance and a staff position funded by THDA in order to start to build housing stock and bring it into compliance with code. The city entity, for us, it's where we've identified already structures that are uninhabitable because of their such poor condition that they just can't be repaired, they need to be replaced.
Right.
And then there has to be a homeowner. It's a grant that the city administers They're not difficult to do. I've worked on them at state level, but you take one unit, replace it with another. If they remain in that unit for a period of 5 years and keep it up, it becomes theirs. So it's replacing a deplorable condition with one that's
Well,
acceptable.
the question I have then is the city prepared to administer? Are we gonna have to have more employees all to do that?
No, sir. I mean, the city is prepared. As we were saying, that for the smaller grants, that really it's the city works sort of as a connector between the property
Liaison.
owner and the agency. And then that's our role steps out, other than we've identified, we agree and have said that, yes, this is something that needs help. Then we connect the two, and then they go on their merry way to conduct their business. As Sharon had indicated, on the much larger ones that work with a nonprofit, there is, as part of that grant process, money to fund someone with that nonprofit that specifically deals directly just with that grant. And the city would just then work as sort of a, not even an advisor role, but just a source of information for that person.
That makes sense. And then the administration for the other one is not anything that even approaches a full-time or a part-time position. It's literally turning in the paperwork after it's completed to THDA. They're, as they explained to us in the meeting that lasted about 2.5 hours, their goal, they don't want to keep this money, they want to give this money away, and they don't want to make it difficult for people in need to use this money or for cities to use it and administer it. So.
You mentioned at one point that some of this would build new structures.
That would be nonprofit. So those, and they're not limited to our geographic area of the city. The nonprofits can build anywhere within the county.
And really would have no, other than getting approval from the city to build or whatever.
That's correct.
We would have nothing to do with that
That's
piece
correct.
of it.
Correct.
Okay, good. That sounds really good.
Well, it's just, the idea came to us that, code enforcement is not the most popular thing in the world that you could do anyway, but in some cases, enforcing the code is making a life-altering decision for people. If they have an illness or they just don't have the wherewithal, you're really having a life-changing impact on them. So we didn't want to be able to not be able to provide them with any resources that.
I think that's great.
Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
No action required on that, right? I mean,
No, sir, we're
it's
just giving
for
you an
information.
update because at some point, as you see, we may come to you with an application where one thing needs to change for the other.
We just have to be ready to explain it, right?
I nominate Mike.
Yeah, I'll second that.
I nominate Lauren. So, anything else on this? Okay, so do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded? Second. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.